confrontation in the hallways of Capitol Hill on Monday is speaking volumes today about the toxic stew that permeates there. It's a mix of violent rhetoric and distrust and misinformation and right-wing information bubbles that is eating away at the foundations of the U.S. Capitol and our democracy. It hints at one way to fight back against it as well, though. Take a look at this photo. This is Minnesota Senator Tina Smith. She's speaking to Republican Mike Lee. Now, this photo was taken after Mike Lee posted about the gunman who murdered one Minnesota lawmaker and her husband and wounded another and his spouse. One of those posts says this, quote, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way," end quote. There's no evidence to suggest that the suspect was a Marxist or had any affinity for or part of the political left. According to the Associated Press, he was deeply opposed to abortion rights and had attended Trump rallies and was registered as a Republican prior to moving to Minnesota. Notebooks found in his car had a list of more than 45 officials, including several Democratic members of Congress. Those are the facts, not disputed by anyone. Contrast those facts with Mike Lee's disinformation and lies, posts he made literally the day after the murders. Senator Smith described them as nothing short of cruel. Here's what she said about her conversation with Mike Lee.
I wanted him to know about the consequence of his words. And I went to him and I said, you know, your message on social media showed the image of the man who killed my friend, potentially minutes before that happened. And your message was, this is what happens. You need to take responsibility and accountability for what you are saying and doing out there in the social media world. And I wanted him to hear that from me directly and not to for me to tweet out at him. I think that is important, that he understands, again, the consequence of what the impact that his words have on people who are going through so much pain and trauma.
What did he have to say when you confronted him with that?
Well, I mean, honestly, I don't think this is a person who's used to being confronted. I don't think he's somebody who's used to being challenged, and I think he didn't quite know what to do. I approached him from a position of respect and wanting him to understand what I thought, and he didn't have that much to say. What he needs to do is he needs to apologize. I really think that he should take that post down.
This afternoon, Mike Lee did just that. All three tweets related to the shooting were taken down. We're back with Sarah Longwell and John Heilman. Sarah, it's such a gutting example, but such an important story that when you pierce someone's disinformation sphere, even if they're a United States senator, and you stand in front of them as a human being, you can introduce shame into that petri dish.
Not just introduce shame, but induce perhaps the better angels of one's nature to prevail, which I think happened by him deleting these posts. And look, Mike Lee is such an interesting specimen in that you can sort of track. Mike Lee was a never Trumper to start. I mean, he actually stood on the floor of the convention in 2016, screaming and yelling, trying to oppose Donald Trump's nomination. Today, he is somebody who is terminally online. There's a great piece in the Bulwark right now by our Joe Perticone, our Capitol Hill reporter, who just tracks how much time Mike Lee spends just tweeting nonsense into the world. And that is not who Mike Lee used to be. And so sort of the 10 years of Donald Trump, you can track the degradation of the Republican Party, the degradation of people's behavior on social media, basically through the degradation of Mike Lee. And I think that if there's going to be any salvation for any of us, it's going to be rediscovering the decency and the humanity that Senator Peters brought to him by saying, this is shameful behavior. Like, you know better. I'm your colleague. Like, don't do this. Don't be like this. And that ability to remind somebody of the essential humanity of what was happening there and pulling him out of what is a disease that a lot of people are afflicted by now of just sitting on Twitter and posting garbage and nonsense and getting the adrenaline rush from the likes, which seems like he does, his sort of drinking liberal tears thing. She reminded him that there were human beings who had been murdered, that they were friends of hers, that she was his colleague, and that he had a responsibility as a human being and as a United States senator not to behave like this. And the fact that she heard him is a rare, because usually, as we saw with Joni Ernst, the move now is to double down, right? To never admit wrong, to never say that the thing you're doing is inhumane. When she said, yeah, look, people die. That's what happens if you cut Medicaid, And then instead of apologizing for being glib about people's lives, she went to a graveyard and took a selfie of herself making jokes about it. That has been standard operating procedure from Republicans. And so for somebody as far gone as Mike Lee has appeared to be over the last few years, to see him take it down. Now, it'd be better if he apologized. Like, it'd be better if he did more. But at least taking them down, that's a start. And I'm glad he did it.
It just strikes me that the bar is so freaking low. We're now talking about a Republican senator who lost his mind. I think Tim Alberta 3 years ago, profiled the journey that Sarah's talking about, John, sort of his descent into MAGA madness. And it's totally tangled up with the mythology of the manosphere. But Joe Rogan's been breaking up with Trumpism in little tiny ways every week for about the last 6 weeks. I mean, it's not masculine to make fun of someone who's been assassinated. It's not even a sentence anyone should have to utter. It's batshit crazy. What is wrong with him?
Well, you asked me to get my PhD in psychology or psychotherapy here, Nicole, and I don't have time between now and when I need to answer that question on this show in live TV. But
we've got 2 hours. You kind of do.
I do remember that Tim Alberta piece and how good it was. And it was always a curious thing, because Sarah just mentioned the relevant thing. Mike Lee was a very conservative guy who was seen as rational and sane and not an extremist, but like kind of hailing from that kind of Utah tradition that Mitt Romney embodied, where he was not just because he was never Trump, but he was considered a thoughtful and lawyerly conservative, a constitutional conservative, someone who, again, you could disagree with him, but who did not have this kind of feral, aggressive, kind of China-breaking, trolling kind of streak. And now he's a guy who on X is not known as at Senator Mike Lee or Senator Mike Lee of Utah. He's based Mike Lee. Which is shorthand, I guess, in social media speak and right-wing social media speak for someone who's kind of been red-pilled, who's gone into the depths of the MAGA sphere. Based Mike Lee is someone whose primary identification now on social media relates not to being a United States senator, but to being a creature of the right on social media. And I think that is, one of the not the central affliction of the Trump era has been the destruction of conservatism as a meaningful thing, the destruction of the Republican Party and the rebuilding of it in the Trumpist populist nationalist image. But the way in which right-wing social media has become, Elon Musk talked about the woke mind virus. This is the anti-woke mind virus. And the anti-woke mind virus is the thing that now animates someone like Mike Lee, who cares more about scoring points in that cesspool than he does about legislating or about constitutional principles or about doing any of the things that he cared most about a decade ago when he was United States Senator. And how that transformation happened, I don't know, but he is not alone. That is a signature sickness of the right in the MAGA era, that scoring points on social media, no matter how mean you are, no matter how inhumane you are, no matter how cruel you are, that matters more than any kind of substantive accomplishment in the world that some of us still call reality. And that is a giant problem. And if this thing brings him back to reality a little bit, God bless him and God bless her for trying to break the spell.